We are live on Facebook. Yay! So we're here on the Winner's Journey podcast this morning. I'm so excited to resume our podcast. We actually paused for a couple of weeks because I have been traveling. I'm right now in South America, but that doesn't limit the reach, right? And thanks to the wonders of technology, today I am so honored to introduce to you Sandra Coffey, who is an author, a journalist, a publicist, and so many wonderful things, all related to media. She's dedicated to helping people get on the media, which is so important nowadays for anyone that has a brand, a product, for artists, for everybody. Every creative mind needs to get on the media. Sandra, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Viviana. It's lovely to meet you.
Well, it's great to hear what you do. For me, it's exciting, of course, because I'm in the media. I love media. I believe in advertising and marketing. I believe in sharing your message, right? That's the main, I
Mm,
always say that's the goal of it all. More than your product, it's your message, your heart, your mission in life.
yes, yeah,
How do you get
yes.
started? How do you start in this journey?
Yeah, one of the things I get people to look at first is a lot of times when people have a product or a book or an exhibition, their first thought is to put the exhibition at the top of their publicity efforts, and that's their main focus. And while that's brilliant and it's fantastic to have an exhibition, to have anything that any kind of a product, it's amazing. But you really have to take the product emphasis out of the publicity, because if you're going to even get the interest of a journalist, they want to know, how does this product affect their audience? So instead of putting the product as the centerpiece, as the main star of your publicity, what I always recommend people to do is to put your reader in there and to put, how does it help people? How does it entertain people? How does it excite people? Does it make them laugh? What does it actually do? And put that as the main focus. And if you have like a customer who's tried it out already, or you have a good testimonial, put that in the foreground. Now, that's not to say that your product or your exhibition or your work isn't going to get noticed. It'll actually get more noticed. It'll be more widely read, because people are attracted to stories. They're not attracted to reading about a product as such. If the product, and they know that the product has helped someone, like cure a disease or help them overcome something in their life, and this could be you, your personal story could also be the main focus, but through the product and through your service, it has helped you get somewhere. And that's what I always say to people first. I get press releases sent to me all the time, and it's about a product launch. And I say, okay, that's fantastic. And those details need to get into the media, because you need to tell people when you're launching it. But you've got to take this out of the foreground and put who it helps in there instead. So that's my main, because from someone who's worked in journalism for many years, that's what always attracts me first, is the human interest side of the story. And that's why I always encourage people, that's where you need to start. And even if you're planning like a content calendar across 3 to 4 months, try to figure out, how your stories relate to readers of the publications that you are pitching to. So that would be my biggest tip, really, to start with.
The story.
Definitely, yeah. And how it can, it doesn't necessarily have to be this major transformation, because some people think, okay, that's fantastic, but I actually don't know even now where to start. But I often get people to look at their own story, or look at the stories of people that they've worked with. What have they done to overcome a problem, and have they used your product or service to get there? Like, that is a story. It doesn't always necessarily have to be something that has to be a massive transformation for someone. Oftentimes it's the small wins that people can relate to better, because they say, oh yeah, I can actually do that, or that's
Right.
achievable for me. And for me, that it's very important to take the focus off that, but to look around you and see who you've worked with and who've used your service, and ask them, how has it helped you? And
Right.
get them to work with you. And oftentimes I ask I ask clients to go out and get 3 recent testimonials, or one if you've only worked with one person, and go and ask them and see if they will agree to doing publicity with you for, I suppose it depends on, how long of a publicity campaign you want to run, but to sit down with that person and plan out a publicity campaign with them. And obviously if he or she is happy to be the face of your business for that period. And I do go into this more in the book, how to work more closely with people who you've helped, and to get them to push their success story to the media. And the media love that kind of thing, for sure.
Absolutely. And I love the fact, I love what you're sharing, because I believe in the power of storytelling, and it's fantastic what it can do for a brand. But
Yes,
one
yeah.
of the things that you say is that it could be a simple story. We always think it has to be this major dramatic, transformation or tragedy, and then became the super success. But the reality is that most of us live an average life, you know, and
Yes, yes,
everybody's life has ups and downs. Everyone. Yeah.
yeah. Um, and I often, what I like to get people to do is to put is to go away for like a weekend or even an hour a day and really think about why they want to get publicity. Oftentimes people, they have a product coming, and it's almost at the back of their mind a lot of the time that they need to get publicity for it. And sometimes they rush their campaign, and they might give themselves 2 to 3 weeks to do a campaign, which is fine if you've already built up relationships with some members of the press. But if you're starting from zero, then you need to work back, for me anyway, 4 to 6 months before you would pitch a media outlet. Because nowadays, and I suppose sadly, because COVID has changed a lot of things in newsrooms and for journalists, they have a lot more things on their plate. So you need to give them more time for them to see your story, and to also to be on their radar for a little while, because cold pitching journalists can work, but it doesn't work very often. And certainly as a result of COVID, cold pitching can
Mm.
not be a very good idea. And I always try and get people to engage a little bit with the journalist before they decide to pitch to them. And this could be a simple thank you email to the journalist for an article that they read of theirs, and that you're implementing something that they have written into your business, which is a fantastic way to get a journalist's attention. You actually read their stuff, but you read it and you also implement it. Because as a journalist, former journalist, people often used to say to me, oh, I read your piece. But then we'll be over and back a little bit on email, and I'll slowly discover, or quickly discover, that they never read it at all. So if you're going to say, yeah, and it becomes very obvious in what they tell me subsequently that, okay, they never ever bought the newspaper, or
Yeah.
so for me, if you're going to tell a journalist that you've read their piece, actually highlight a bit of it, or relate or comment on something in the article. Because don't just add it in there as a line, oh, I read your work, I love your work, and thank you so much for what you're doing in this area. Look, at anybody can write that. It's a matter of read even just one of their articles. I mean, I know a woman I'm working with at the moment, and she's like, okay, this is so overwhelming. How many articles a week do I have to read, in order to get to know a journalist? And I always say at least 2, and 2 recent ones, but try and pick ones that you can somewhat relate to yourself, and try and build up a little bit of a bank of information about the publication and the journalist. It doesn't have to be, a crazy amount of time. Oftentimes just following them on Twitter can be enough to get some idea of what they like. And also Twitter is an excellent place to find out whether or not you can pitch to them on the DMs in Twitter. A lot of journalists don't like that, but some of them will openly say in their bio on Twitter, look, reach out to me on DMs, or here's my email. But certainly, if you're going to say that you've read it, please have read at least one article, because it becomes very, very obvious. And you don't want to burn a bridge before you've even had a chance to even put the foundation down.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's very important, I think.
I do agree with you. I think one of the most important things when reaching out to the media is to be honest. Like honest,
Yes,
not
yes,
just to the media. Any, if you're a brand, if you have a product, if you have an image, the worst you can do is come out as a liar from the beginning. From the beginning, you close doors that you cannot imagine.
yes.
I
And the
think
funny thing about the closing of door. Sorry, Viviana, go ahead.
yeah, I said we never disappoint one person. We usually that person is going to make a comment eventually to someone, you know? It's like
Yes,
you never disappoint one person. Remember that, we're not just one, we have a network. So it's always
yes.
honesty is the best presentation card that we can have.
Yes, I totally agree because you might be pitching a local journalist today in a local newspaper, but those journalists talk to national journalists, they talk to radio journalists, and that local journalist that's there, that's sitting in your local newspaper now, in 2 years' time could be in a national newspaper. And I always try and get people to think of the local newspaper journalist, radio journalist, TV journalist as someone who, if you build a really good relationship with, will be able to pitch you to the bigger organizations if your story is good enough. And I often did this. If I got a very good story from in when I worked in local media, I would pitch it to the nationals because I want more people to hear the story. And I think this is a really, really good story. It deserves to be heard by more people. And national journalists are really interested in pitches from local journalists. They go to the top of the pile every time. And the national journalist will say to the local one or regional one, look, that story isn't really, we did something recently about that, or maybe pitch it to us in a couple of months' time because we might be doing a supplement in that area. But your story from being in a local outlet, and if it's pitched to a bigger outlet, as I say, will be immediately noticed by the journalists because they have relationships. And as you said, if you let down you're not just letting down one person if you're not honest with someone in a local outlet. They know people in numerous outlets and they all help each other and talk to each other a lot more than people think, funnily
Yeah,
enough.
exactly.
Um,
Exactly. Tell us about your book.
well, it's, yeah, thank you so much for mentioning it. It's 3 years in the making. I started it 3 years ago, and it's something I had wanted to do for the longest time because I had seen so many people try and get publicity and make similar mistakes. And some people whose stories were brilliant, but they just didn't know how to communicate it to a journalist, an under pressure journalist that doesn't have time to read long press releases or to drag information out of you. And I thought, okay, look, I need to get a book together about publicity from a journalist's point of view and from a journalist who has seen newsrooms change on account of social media. Because I actually started in journalism a couple of months before 9/11, and 9/11 was one of my major stories that I covered. And I was working in a newspaper in Ireland at the time, but there was a woman from my local city who died in 9/11. So it was a massive story to us. Um, so I do talk a little bit about that and how journalists starting off, are ones that you should, as someone looking for publicity, should introduce yourself to, because when you're starting off in any job, you're always looking for connections. And as journalists starting off, it's so important to be able to have stories and show your editor that people are emailing you with stories and that you're making connections and making some waves in the industry. But the book is very much from a journalist's point of view. And as I say, I started it 3 years ago, and then I had my daughter in the middle of it all, so it had to be put on hold. And I finished it a couple of months ago, and I'm just so thrilled that it's finally out there. It just made me smile when I uploaded it. I just thought, oh my God, it's going to go out there now and hopefully help people. And I was trying to write the last few bits and edit it during lockdown with my toddler jumping on a bed behind me or a couch behind me, and I thought I am never going to get this out. It has to get out. I don't care. It has got to go. But thankfully, I'm just thrilled that it's now out there, and it kind of goes through a lot of, elements of publicity that maybe people might not have thought about. Like different routes you can take outside of a press release. I dedicate a pretty large chapter on that. There's stuff about like, okay, you get a journalist to your launch. And this is very much written from me being at a lot of launches, that some were good and many were terrible. And if you get a journalist to your launch, that is a huge achievement nowadays. It's like a massive achievement. So you need, it's a big deal, because to get journalists to leave their desks now is really difficult. And once they get there, it is so important to respect their time. And I know when you're hosting a launch, there is so many things happening and your head is all over the place. You're trying to coordinate many things. But if this journalist has made an effort to be there, they may be there for half an hour, and you'd be lucky to get them for half an hour, 40 minutes. Have some kind of a schedule for them, so when they're there, and this can be online or it can be, hopefully we'll be having physical launches now soon, and I'm looking forward to them. But to make sure, what to do when they're there, how to keep them entertained, and have things for them to do. So there's a big chapter on that. I go into detail about building relationships with press photographers, and how you can actually build a very good media strategy around photos alone. You don't have to write a single word if you're very, very good at building out a photo strategy, which you can use as a media strategy. And oftentimes they are possibly a lot stronger than a 500-word press release buried somewhere, as opposed to a really strong image that gets your story across on page like 5 or 8 or 10, or very high up on an online website. And there's lots of different things in the book. I do tell a story about my very first piece that I got printed as a freelancer looking to get into journalism college. I went back to this story because for me, it was, I wanted to get into journalism school really badly. And I needed to get a couple of stories printed in publications, and I needed to get an interview done as well. So when you really don't know how to do this or how it works, I remember my parents saying to me, well, you need to get out of the house. You need to actually go into town and walk around and see what's happening. And I was like, that's actually a very good point. So, because I was just trying to get some stories on my phone, and I was like, now this is pre-social media as well, of course. So I ended up talking to these 2 women who were starting a cake business in my local town. And it took a little bit of convincing for them to trust me to tell their story to the media. But they took a chance, and we got featured in the media. To cut a long story short, because all of it's in the book. But they got so much courage from just getting that one feature that they kept pitching the media afterwards, and they started to learn what works and what doesn't. And they built a very good relationship with one of the major newspapers in their city. And long after I stopped working with them, I would see them pop up all the time. And I just thought, it's amazing what you can do when you just have the confidence to put yourself out there. And, sometimes journalists will tell you, this story is not what we're looking for, but come back to us when you have something along this, or this. But if you don't even have the courage to even ask them, okay, this story isn't what you're looking for now, but can I ask you what kind of stories you're looking for? Now, some journalists will not have time to reply back to that. But if you start with those that are working around you in your local region, then they may possibly have time to tell you, well, in 3 months' time, we have something coming out, and actually we might be interested in talking to you for that. You just need to have the confidence and the courage to go for it. And so many people I know have great stories, but they're afraid to put themselves out there, which is very sad. But for this cake business that I did my very first story on, they were the same. They were like, no one's going to be interested in us making cakes, but they were making novelty cakes like castles, and there was something very different about what they were doing back then, and it was very new at the time. Not very new now, but it was back then. And I was like, no, we can get really good photographs. We can get a journalist's attention with this. And they ended up going on to get lots of publicity, mainly because they took that first step and thought, okay, let's try and get the interest of a local publication. And then it just snowballed from there because the photos were amazing. And then they ended up pitching themselves long after, and it just made me smile. It makes me smile to see that they're still doing it and they're still getting featured, and it's helping their business like in a major way.
Of course, media is so important for any brand, for any business. It's
Yeah,
just
for
it just
sure.
can bring you from zero to hero, basically, from this
Yeah,
level
for
to
sure.
being discovered. And you don't have to be in business for years before reaching out to the media, right?
No, not at all. And oftentimes, journalists will be interested in newbies because they will know all the ones that are established and they will have done numerous stories on them. And if you're new and if you've got something new to say or something relevant to say, you should get out there and say it and tell them for sure.
Exactly. Wow, thank you so much. There's so much going on
Thank
here.
you.
So much to learn. We're gonna have to get your book.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and if you would be kind to put the link of the book on the comments later so that the audience that's watching, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people, entrepreneurs, creative, want to read the book and learn how to get on the media. There's a lot of valuable information you shared today. This is an interview
Thank you
to
so
watch
much.
again and again because there's so many pieces of really good information that you just gave us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Viviana. It's lovely talking to you.
Thanks. And I want to thank everyone out there who's watching. Thanks for tuning in to the business. Incredible podcast. This today, I recommend for you to watch again because I am in the media and I have been in the media for 10 years. I'm telling you, I learned so much from Sandra today. So many incredible pieces of
Oh,
information
thank you.
that I'm gonna be rewatching myself. So I recommend you also watch it again. And I'll see you next week. Next week at the Winner's Journey podcast. And don't forget, stay inspired.
Bye-bye.